Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, which Craig Touch and myself, Roland Hume, chat to the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and self-publishing we are in. And today we have two extremely special guests we are very, very excited to have on. It is Craig and Roland. Hi, Craig. Hi, Roland. How are you doing today? I'm doing fine. What about you, Craig?
I'm doing good. You know, we want to every once in a while, we want to just talk amongst ourselves, right? And sometimes something sparks our interest in the news that we want to come on and talk about in general. So that's what kind of happened today. I mean, it's something that has been building. It's not this one story, but this is the one that sort of like made us think, hey, you know, we should talk about this as a whole in general.
Well, I mean, yep, the story itself, I was like super inspired by. I wouldn't call myself like a Swiftie, but I like Taylor Swift, and she's done something really, really cool that I thought was worthy of you and I having a conversation about. So I don't know. Do you want me to give you the dog and pony show and you respond to it?
Yeah, let's go. You showed it to me, so why don't you tell it to everybody else?
Okay, a couple of days ago, it was revealed that Taylor Swift, you might have heard of Taylor Swift. Are you a Swiftie?
I'm not a Swiftie, but my daughter really is, and we have some friends that are like, one of our friends traveled to, what was it, like somewhere in the Netherlands to see the concert because she couldn't get tickets here. So she actually booked a flight to somewhere in the Netherlands and went and saw a concert there. And it was actually cheaper. Like, you know, I mean, she wanted to do that anyway, so she took a little vacation too, but she went and spent the money on a flight and the tickets, and it was, I think, cheaper than if she could have got like the tickets probably scalped here.
It used to be that you go to Amsterdam to smoke some weed when you go to the concert, but you can do that probably more easily here now. Anyway, we digress. Taylor Swift, yes, Taylor Swift, cultural phenomenon. She is releasing a book, a 256-page book called The Eras Tour. And the really interesting thing that I thought was worth making this podcast about was the fact that she has decided to self-publish this book. So she is like bypassing all of the big five publishing houses and stuff like that. She is doing it all herself. So she is publishing this 256-page book. It's $39.99. And she has got an agreement with Target, which is this massive chain of stores here. We call it Target, to have this book in all of the Targets here. And she's like, yeah, we're not even going to bother with publishers. I mean, Taylor Swift is so big that she knows she doesn't even need to bother with that. So she's going to write this book, publish this book. Target, which has stores all across the United States, they have exclusive rights to sell this book. And I think that's amazing. It's like, we keep talking about how self-publishing is becoming more and more important, and more people are like bypassing traditional publishing completely. And it's not just, you know, small publishers like you and I, small writers like you and I, self-publishing our books. Tons of romance writers already do it, but Taylor Swift is just part of a new generation of huge names who are like, why do we bother with the traditional publishers? And I don't know. I think it's really cool. I have lots of things to talk about the details of it, but I mean, what do you think about this fact that the Taylor Swift has very elegantly and demurely given the middle finger to traditional publishers?
I think it's great. Listen, I think that, you know, for her, it's a absolutely obvious move, right? Like, she has so many fans, she doesn't need the publicity that would come from the big five who, you know, have their own marketing teams or whatever. She just has to tweet out, hey, I got a new book, and that's it. You know, it's not going to cost her anything. And all of a sudden, every single one of her fans are going to go out and buy at least one copy. So from that perspective, you know, sometimes I think, okay, well, you know, somebody like this, it makes more sense to do that, right? Because they have that immediate push. It's going to go to number one, I'm sure, immediately. And when you think about it from the terms of the self-published author like you and I, it's like, okay, well, you know, we don't have that, right? We can't be like, oh, I'll just put a book out and immediate bestseller. But I think what it shows us is that you don't need what the big five give you anymore. And it's not just marketing. I mean, it's distribution. She made a deal with Target. But you don't need that anymore. And everyone, even the big names, are starting to see that, and that the money that she'll make is so, like, I mean, so much larger than what she would make if she made even a sweetheart deal with a publisher. Like, they're never going to give her more than, what, I don't know, 20 or 30%. I mean, even that would be crazy high, right? Whereas she'll make 70, 80% self-publishing. So I don't know. It's a no-brainer for people like her, and I love that it is just pulling more and more power away from the big five, and showing them their irrelevancy even stronger.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the interesting thing to me is, yeah, Taylor Swift has a great thing because she has this huge influence. She's already got an agreement with Target, and the biggest reason why you might still want to go with a traditional publisher is it is really at the moment the only, you would think it's the only viable way to get your book into bookstores, brick and mortar bookstores. But Taylor Swift is showing, no, that's not necessarily the case, because she has a personal agreement with Target. So she can be like, I will print out, I don't know, 2 million copies of this book. You will stock it in your 1,956 stores across the United States. And yeah, they get the exclusive rights. People go there to Target exclusively to buy this book. And it's great. She doesn't need the traditional publishers to get her books in a physical bookstore. But the thing I think that is interesting is you don't need to be Taylor Swift to achieve that. I mean, I used to have one of my copywriting clients was ShopRite, which is a huge chain of supermarkets on the East Coast of the United States. And I spoke to one of their buyers there, and sometimes they will have small-time writers, like the likes of you and me, who go there and be like, hey, I'll sell you 300 copies of my paperback book for $2 a piece if you stock them and sell them. And they make little agreements like that. You bypass the publisher completely. You have to find your own printer, obviously, and do your own editing and stuff like that. And whoever you sell it to has to get on board with that and be willing to buy the books heavily discounted. But there are avenues to getting your books into retailers, if not bookstores, that bypass traditional publishing completely. And then Taylor Swift is just taking that to the next level, like she takes everything to the next level.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't remember if we had somebody on the podcast, or it was somebody that I had worked with in a consult call or something. One of the authors, I remember they did sort of a similar thing where they took their book to Costco, to a local Costco, and they said, hey, can you sell this book in your store? And shockingly to me, at least, they said yes, and they actually stocked her book. And yeah, like, if you're willing to do the legwork and go to these places and say, hey, here's my book, you can absolutely get in front of people. You don't have to have the pull of Taylor Swift. Now, again, yes, you have to get it printed and you have to put up that upfront cost, but there are ways to do this. You can go to libraries, you can give your book to the libraries, get it in front of people that way. There's a lot of ways that you can do it. And obviously, look at the Brandon Sanderson phenomenon, right? Where he went on the Kickstarter thing, and he has his traditional publishing deals, but then he went on Kickstarter. He made $40 million, and that was for a set of books that was outside of his regular publishing thing, because he as well realized, big name author, he's written huge books, and he's got those deals already. So it's not like, some people argue, oh, the only people that self-publish can't get real publishing deals. Well, obviously we know Taylor Swift could have easily gotten a publishing deal, but like Brandon Sanderson has publishing deals, but he wanted to publish outside of those, write a whole bunch of other books. And I bet you he didn't make $40 million from the books that he traditionally published.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
It's crazy. It's crazy what self-publishing can do for authors these days.
And it's funny, you mentioned Brandon Sanderson. Of course, we spoke to the president of publishing at Kickstarter, and we focused on Brandon Sanderson, but he's not, or maybe he was at that point. But there's one other independent publisher that is massive on Kickstarter and has the two the next two or the next three biggest projects at the time we did that podcast. And they're an independent publisher called Headstamp Publishing, and they publish really, really nice, hardback, glossy, shiny, beautiful books about guns with these wonderful photographs by this guy called James Rupley. And they have these wonderful writers like this guy called Jonathan Ferguson from the Royal Armoury in London, and Ian McCullum, who runs this YouTube channel called Forgotten Weapons, and they write all of this stuff about guns. It's a real coffee table book for like real American men who drink black coffee and eat bacon for breakfast. And somebody we know, one of our friends, a chap called Caleb Daniels, who came onto the Fully Booked podcast to talk about social media, and he's a genius. He just finished the Kickstarter for a book he's writing, which is called Licensed Troubleshooter: The Guns of James Bond. Yes, I managed to squeeze a James Bond reference in there once again. But he, during the course of the month that he had this book up on Kickstarter, raised $600,000, which is going to go into publishing this beautiful book in the beginning of next year. And it's like, yeah, he is a young man in his 20s, and he's worked bloody hard to achieve this, obviously. But at the same time, it's like he has managed to bypass traditional publishing and find and create a partnership with an independent publisher and produce something that yeah, I don't know, once again it is a really significant project that's going to be beautifully executed, and it bypasses traditional publishing completely.
Yeah, and I think that shows you, I mean, you're not, again, those are not like always the typical story when you go to Kickstarter. Not everyone's going to make 600,000 or 40 million, but it shows you that it's possible. It shows you that you don't have to be a big name. Caleb, you know, we had him on, and he'd written books, but we had him on talking about social media, and I mean that is one of the strengths that you need to be able to promote your stuff on Kickstarter to get.
He hadn't even written the book at that point.
He hadn't written a book when he was on our.
I think he just started this project.
Oh, that was what.
No, this is going to be his first published book, which is amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, but he has that social media reach, and he knows how to work social media, and so by studying social media, which is definitely one of those things that we talk a lot about, and authors need to sort of figure out, because it's such a strong way to reach today's audiences, right? It's like all the different ways, book talk on TikTok and Instagrams and, you know, all that stuff, right? And you get that in front of people, you know, they pass it along to their friends, et cetera, and then something like Kickstarter, and now all of a sudden you've got $600,000. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, that is great. That's like, it's a life-changing thing. He's a chap who started something from nothing, creating an Instagram account, and now he's going to have this amazing coffee table book that is produced in beautiful quality. And it's like, if he'd written letters to different publishers, they'd have probably all laughed in his face. But no, he finds the right independent publisher who sees the value in what he does, and then boom, it can happen. And Taylor Swift, yeah, she says, I'm going to write a book. She writes a book. She finds the right printer, she finds the right editor, she does everything not everything herself. I'm sure she delegates, but she uses her own team to do these things. And it's like, boom, you can bypass the gatekeepers of traditional publishing. And it really just goes to show. I mean, I'm going to mention James Bond again. I know this is driving you nuts, but Ian Fleming Publications, the estate of Ian Fleming, who own the rights to the James Bond books, in November, I think, of 2022, they said, hey, we are going to become our own publishing house, and we are going to publish these books. And they republished all the original James Bond books, but also they republished continuation novels. They published brand new novels by this young lady called Kim Sherwood. They've just commissioned a new trilogy of books by a brilliant crime writer called Wasim Khan. And it's like, they can do whatever they want, because what is out there now allows them to create and publish things, bypassing traditional publishing completely, and be so much more agile. I mean, they commissioned, had someone write, a guy called Charlie Hickson, who's a brilliant writer, and actually got a book into bookstores within 2 months for the coronation of King Charles III, and it became a #1 bestseller in Britain. And it's like, can you imagine coming up with the idea for a book and then going to #1 bestseller in the UK within the space of 2 months? No traditional publisher could ever do that. And yet Ian Fleming Publications was able to do that because of the freedom of being a self-publishing or an independent publishing house.
Yeah, there's so much red tape in the traditional, and plus, they have a huge backlog of books that they have to get through. So you've got to wait your turn. They have their own processes, their own people that they do for editing, for cover design, and whereas a self-publisher can, you're the author, the editor you always use, they're booked up for a few months. Well, then you just switch over to use a different editor. It doesn't have to hold you up, right? Whereas in the self-publishing space, it's very hard, even when you're a big name, to push something through really, really fast. If Taylor Swift dropped her book and said, "I have it ready right now," and offered it up to the first the first big five that could deliver it quickest. I think even if they did their best, they probably would still take months to get that book out. I don't know. I'm no expert, right? But I mean, in general, that's not something they can do, is just pop a book out whenever you want. Whereas she can just be like, if she had finished the book, she could have dropped it and said, hey, my book's available tomorrow, and that would be it. At least ebook, at least, right? There's a bit of distribution that has to happen in terms of the paperback. But by the way, Caleb Daniels, he was on episode 84, for anyone that wants to look that up on Building Social Media. So, if you are wondering whether or not he knows what he's talking about, I think his $600,000 Kickstarter should give you an idea that he probably does. So
yes, he definitely does.
I want to look that one up. But you're right. So, you look at, it's funny, there's when you think about what they did with Ian Fleming Publications, right? So they've started their own publishing house. They've taken back, I guess, what did they take back the rights to older books from the
they took back the rights to the original Ian Fleming books and all of the books that got published afterwards. So they had what they call the continuation novels. They had an author called John Gardner. They had this author called Raymond Benson, who's someone else that we had on this podcast, who's a brilliant writer himself, but he wrote a bunch of James Bond books. And they've had Anthony Horowitz, who you're probably familiar with. He wrote the Alex Rider books. And so they are slowly republishing these. They skipped the John Gardner ones because they were a bit weird, but the Raymond Benson books, they've started republishing incrementally, and like they're cracking books. And if you love the old 1990s Pierce Brosnan James Bond books, James Bond films, you'll love these books. It's like, yeah, they have the opportunity to take ownership of this and do what traditional publishers can't. And you mentioned just a second ago, I was just going to say, you mentioned just a second ago how slow traditional publishers are. I'm a big fan of Clive Cussler, who wrote all those books about. He wrote Raise the Titanic, and there's somebody I vaguely spoke to recently who wrote a book about Raise the Titanic, and they are getting it traditionally published. And just recently, they complained that the traditional publisher, who was meant to have it out in bookstores in 2024, was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're too busy. We've got too many projects going on. We can probably get it out in 2027." And it's like, yeah, you can understand why people just don't want to work with traditional publishers when that's the kind of attitude they have towards things.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was just going to mention. So there's another parallel between what Ian Fleming Publications did and sort of what Taylor Swift did with her music, right? She couldn't take back the rights. It's sort of like a famous issue of musicians, how they get locked into these deals with the record labels, and they hardly make any money, and then they get screwed royally with their royalties. screwed royally with their royalties.
I don't know, with P. Diddy in the news these days, you're never quite sure where that goes.
But what she did, right, was she took back. She couldn't take back the book, the music. She re-released all of her albums. She re-recorded all of her albums so that she could basically screw over the record labels that was screwing her over. So she basically said, okay, I can't take those ones, but I can record brand new versions of every song I've done and redo those albums and release them myself and get everything back myself. And that's what she did. And so I think that sort of experience probably led her to making this decision to not go with a traditional publisher, because it would have been the exact same thing. She would have had to sign over the rights to her book. They would have given her hardly any money. She would have no control over it. So I think she learned from that experience and said, hey, that was a terrible thing. I'm not going to do that again in this new industry of publishing that I'm entering. So I think that's really interesting.
I mean, the reason I'm a Swiftie is not because she's a very beautiful young woman. It's not because she does these catchy songs. It's because she's a stone cold badass when it comes to this stuff. She's just like, oh, you don't want to give me the rights to my songs? I'll re-record them all. Yours are now obsolete. Have fun in obscurity. It's like, yeah, she's a killer.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's I mean, I think that was a brilliant move, and I hope a lot of artists sort of follow suit. But yeah, so I think what a lot of authors, I think in this kind of shows us, okay, again, like when somebody's thinking themselves, well, I'm not a Taylor Swift, I'm not James Bond, I'm not Brandon Sanderson, but it's like, you don't need to be, but the important thing though is like all these people are sort of paving the way to further breaking down those barriers between, traditional publishing, self-publishing, like, being able to, they're sort of making everything easier for everyone that goes behind them, and they're showing people that these things can be done. What might come of these kind of deals, maybe Target will, because of this, and if it's successful, maybe they'll be more willing to take on other self-publishers that approach them with their books. They're really sort of, you always need those people to trailblaze and to take those chances. That makes it easier for the rest of us. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing here, is that all these people are doing all these things. Sanderson, and now Caleb came along and he's raising 600,000. Like it's showing us. It's like when you and I back in the day, we talked about this before, when we were writing and we were in that Reddit group, and everybody was sort of talking about how much money they're making. And, oh, I made $1,000 this month. I made a few $1,000 this month, and nobody had made $10,000. Nobody had that 5-figure month until somebody did. And then we saw that it was possible, and then all of us all of a sudden started being able to do it, because we saw that was not really a barrier. It was a barrier in our head, right? And it was like, oh, it's actually possible to have that. So let me actually try, instead of like just convincing myself it's not possible, not really doing what I need to make it happen.
That is amazing how that happened, because I remember that we used to have like, oh, I've joined the 4-figure club because you made more than $1,000 in a month, and then the 5-figure club was this lofty goal that you could only aspire to, because most people are like, oh, $10,000 a month, that's a very healthy income to have. And then you and I both, after seeing that person do it, we achieved that ourselves, and it's like it is something you can do.
Yeah, you just sometimes need to see someone else do it to realize that it's possible. There's those kind of people that are the trailblazers, and that's fine, and not everyone is, right? And it's you have to have that ability to take chances, and sometimes having some success in another area allows you to do that. But then there's the other people that see that and they follow that path that has been blazed ahead of them, and they realize, okay, I'm gonna move along that way. And I think that's where the rest of us come in, where we look at that and we're like, okay, yes, these things can happen. It's really don't need traditional publishers anymore. We still see authors. I mean, I still hear from them all the time saying, things about the traditional publishing, how they were trying. And I'm like, why were you even trying? Just self-publish it. Like, just self-publish it. And it's like, it's still, even though to us it's like it's a no-brainer, there's still lots of people that don't get it yet, that haven't really realized, or that still believe in that stigma of like, oh, it's not really a book. Hey, Taylor Swift is going to sell a whole lot of copies of something that, are you still going to say it's not really a book because it didn't, it's not really it's not a real, she's not a real writer because she didn't go through a traditional publisher? I mean, when you see the kind of money she's about to make on that, I think you might change your tune.
Absolutely. And I mean, first of all, with the traditional publishers, that I've spoken to a lot of people who are like, oh, I want to be a real writer and I want to get a traditional publishing contract. And, I'm like, I'm offended by that. And I wipe my tears away with $20 bills. I mean, I don't, but I mean, the fact is, as a self-published author, especially if you were in romance, for example, it's a no-brainer to be self-published if you actually have any business acumen, because yeah, you go to a traditional publisher, you have to wait 6 months to a year for your book to get published. You get 10% of the royalties, you lose rights to that book, they won't publish another book of yours for a year or something. Whereas if you're a self-published author, you can write a book, you can get it up for pre-order within a month, and you don't need to sell as many copies to bring in more money than you would through a traditional publishing contract. And then you can write and publish another one in 3 months' time. And because people are voracious readers, especially in romance, you get the opportunity then to like write 4 books in a year as opposed to just one through traditional publishing. I mean, the rules go completely out of the window, which I just think it is amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, the amount of the ability that you have to take chances, that's the other thing, right? Is so much greater. And you don't have to convince somebody else that it's a good idea, which is what
Yes,
traditional publishing, right? We've seen so many subgenres come up that traditional publishing never wanted to try, but then they've become huge, and now the traditional publishers jumped on that bandwagon and started publishing those kind of books. But they came because people were willing to take those chances. They were able to take those chances because self-publishing allowed them to. They didn't have any gatekeepers saying no, nobody wants that book, based on no information, right? Just based on, well, we've never sold that kind of book before, so clearly nobody wants it. That's not valid. That's not a good argument, right? So people try it, and then it works, or it doesn't, and that's okay, because it doesn't cost you anything, really. I mean, to write the book, it doesn't cost you anything. Maybe you pay to have it edited, to have a cover, and do some marketing. But like that thing, if you're doing it in the right way, is not going to cost you a ton of money, and you might take that chance and realize, okay, that wasn't a good thing, and then you pivot and you try something else. But you could never do that in the traditional publishing format.
Oh, I know. Can you imagine? I mean, I remember when we first started interacting, I used to write MMA romance books, and you kept saying to me, like, who's going to buy an MMA romance book? And I'm like, no, I'm going to do this. And I committed to 4 of them, and they eventually, the last 2 were like pretty good, but no one really wanted them. And then I pivoted, and it was like, oh, I see. If you actually write about what people want to read, you can do it. But you can experiment. And I don't know. Have you had? I had a number of failures. I did one where I was like, "Oh, I'm going to write this book about upper class British people," and then it completely flopped. But fortunately, I was able to then, within the next month, write one about a woman getting sold to a drug cartel and making the cartel boss turn a leaf, and because he had a heart of gold. And it's like, boom! Suddenly you're back up on top of things again. Did you ever experiment with anything and get a failure?
Oh yeah. I had lots of books that didn't go anywhere near where I thought they'd go, and then I'd had ones that went so much better than I ever thought that they would. I mean, my first big success was a motorcycle romance, and I had never even heard of that as a genre before, right? But at that time, I think Sons of Anarchy was big, or something like that, and I saw other people were sort of publishing those, so I thought, oh, I'll try one of those, and it was my biggest success at the time. And that's just, and I don't remember was there a lot of motorcycle romance in traditional publishing back then? I mean, I don't think there was.
No, I don't.
I don't think there was. Like, I think that's one of those genres that just came about because people could publish what they wanted to read about, and they could jump on trends, right? You can jump on trends so much faster if you don't have to wait. Like, if I had to wait, if I was like, oh, Sons of Anarchy is big, I'm gonna write a motorcycle romance, and I sold it to Trad Pub, if they would even take it, which they wouldn't have because it wasn't a thing. And then by the time they published, everybody'd be like, oh, nobody watches that anymore, like
I was gonna say, how many seasons did Sons of Anarchy run?
I don't know. It was a bunch, but like, I think by the time I was publishing it, it was done, but it was still sort of, it was so popular, but it declined. But motorcycle romance, I think, has declined a little bit in popularity to where it was back then, but I think it's still a big thing. I still see books come through the SERPs all the time that are, MC books. You have the billionaire books, the 50 Shades. That was another book that was self-published at the beginning, and well, could she have published that traditionally? I mean, she certainly did after, once they saw that it was successful, right? But she probably couldn't do it before that, right? And now, if somebody writes a book like that, they snap it up. So, I think
monster romance. That's a huge one.
Monster.
I don't know if you've been on TikTok, but can you imagine going to a publisher and saying, "Hi, I've got a romance book. It's about a woman it's about a curvy woman who goes to an island, and there's a wolf there, a gigantic werewolf, who's a real werewolf. He doesn't turn into a human. He's just a wolf, and he really wants her, so he kidnaps her, and they have lots of sex. And he's a wolf throughout all of this, by the way. And we're fully descriptive about how that intercourse goes. And yeah, that's the book. And then if you went to a publisher and said that, they're like, "You're deranged, we're calling the police." Whereas there is a book, I can't remember, it's called The Hunted or something like that, that's like got 12,000 reviews on Amazon, and people are making scores of TikToks about it. And it's like, that could never have existed unless some brilliant deranged woman had been like, "I'm going to write a book about a wolf who kidnaps a woman on an island." And it's like, wow.
Well, I think the shifter romance in general, was that a thing? I mean, was that a traditionally published genre?
I don't think it was.
I don't think it was either. I mean, again, I don't know all the genres, but it certainly became popular. It seemed to become popular back when we were writing and people started writing these books. And I remember thinking, wow, that's like, that's so weird. And I was like, I didn't understand it at all as a genre, as a reader. I was like, who wants to read about that? But then I saw those books making a ton of money, and so I started writing them. I was like, because that's what we did back then. We were jumping on the trends, and again, you cannot write like that. And listen, there's going to be people that are like, oh, what kind of writer are you? You're jumping on trends. Listen, I've always said there's two ways to go, right, in this industry. It's like you write for money and you write for your passion of what you want to write about. And I don't have any judgment either way, and you can do both, right? But for me at the time, I quit my job to support my family and write, and so I was doing it as a business. Just like if I went and wrote articles for magazines about topics that didn't really interest me, doesn't really make me sell. It just makes me somebody who's writing for a living. So I did the same thing with writing, with writing romance. I looked at the trends. I looked at what was selling a lot, and I wrote to those trends. And when the trends changed, I pivoted, and I made good money. I made a good living doing that. But listen, if I was going to write a book about something that I personally would want to read about, a passion of mine, it wouldn't be a romance, right? I never read romance before I started writing it. I would write science fiction, fantasy, YA, dystopia kind of stuff. That's what I would write if it was up to me. But and I still want to one day if I can ever get the time back. But is as a traditionally published author, you can't chase those trends, because by the time you publish, that trend might be gone, right? And you can't capitalize on that. And so again, I mean, that's sort of like one of those things where you decide like maybe that's not for you, but that doesn't mean that you should go traditionally published. It just means like that's just an avenue that is closed to you, basically, if you were a traditionally published author.
And I think there's a difference between chasing a trend and like writing a trend. So I write Motorcycle Club romance books as well. And the first one I wrote, I didn't necessarily know that much about motorcycle clubs or anything like that. But I was like, okay, you've got these bunch of people who have a motorcycle club who are outside of society. And I'm like, they're almost like cowboys or an outlaw gang in some ways. And I'm really into cowboys and stuff. So I managed to find a story I wanted to tell in the framework of a motorcycle club romance book. And then I wrote another one and another one, and I got more into it. And now like people think I'm a motorcycle guy, and I'm like, I'm far too chicken shit to ride a motorcycle, but I know so much about motorcycles now. But I love it because I'm like, I get to write modern day like westerns, except they're love stories, and they have the explosions and the motorcycles and the guns, but they also have the big brooding tattooed guys and the sex scenes. And I'm like, I enjoy what I write. And as I write it, I'm like, these are actually worthwhile books, and I sell enough of them to make me think people appreciate them. So you're not really, you should, you want to obviously chase trends in that you want to write books that people want to read, but also you don't have to compromise on the stories you want to tell necessarily. You can find the stories you want to tell in that genre.
Well, exactly. I mean, like, just because I was writing in those things, I was still telling a story, a romance story that I wanted to tell, but it's a setting, right? It's like, okay, well, this guy's a shifter, or this guy's a motorcycle. In fact, the first book, the one that did well, when I was initially writing it, it wasn't a motorcycle book at all. I think it was set in like a big box store setting, something like that. And I saw that the trend was really growing with the motorcycle stuff. So I just went and I edited sort of the story to be about a motorcycle. So instead of like a group of people in this box store, they became the box store was a clubhouse, and all the friends and the coworkers became part of the motorcycle gang. And it just changed. I just changed sort of that setting, and then it changed a bit of the story. But it was still the story I was telling. I just reworked it, right? And I absolutely am 100% sure that it would never have done very well in its initial format, but it did very well as an MC book. So that's just, I'm happy about it. So to me, it's like, if the answer to the question of has self-publishing gone mainstream is not just yes, but it's almost like, I think self-publishing is the mainstream now. And I think it's almost reverse, where traditional publishing is sort of becoming the afterthought, is, for a lot of people at least. And I think that's an amazing thing, that way that has changed.
And you know what? I think one of the reasons you and I do what we do is not just because we're insane. It's because we get to work with so many people who are writing and self-publishing books. And we, fortunately, through our experiences, have learned enough to know that there is a process you can follow to be more successful than you are now. And it's really rewarding to work with authors and help share what knowledge we have and help them become more successful, because, you get to breathe life into the things that they create and they're passionate about. We get to stick the middle finger up to the traditional publishers. And it's like, I think to a certain extent, I'm so excited about self-publishing becoming more mainstream, because in some ways it means that what we can provide in value to people is more valuable, and we can really help people take advantage of this. And it's really exciting to see authors we've worked with in the past become more successful. I mean, there's one, I think we had her on the podcast before, Lillian Monroe. She goes way back. I think we talked to her about translations, because she translated a lot of books into German. But she started off, and I remember I gave her some advice, and it kind of took her from like the $1,000 a month level to the $10,000 a month level. And now she's like at a super level. She's gone way past where I am. And every time I see one of her books there, I'm like, I am so proud of what she has achieved. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have been able to help in my own tiny way contribute to that. And it's like, it's great. It gives meaning to what we do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, we also see sort of the trend of, so the new Kindle, the Paperwhite and all that stuff, they came out this past week, and one of the newest additions is the color version of the Kindle. And I think Kobo had this before. And obviously, if you want a color book, you can read them on your tablets or whatever, right? But the fact that the Kindle, which is the biggest of the e-reader devices, now supports color, it gives you even more options for your books, like children's stories, which traditionally, they're very colorful and vibrant, and you typically would want to read them on more like a tablet where you can see those colors. Now you can see them on your Kindle. I heard from I wrote about this in the author newsletter, and one of the responses I heard back was from an author that writes in fantasy, and they said they always include colorful maps and character diagrams of their creatures or whatever in the back of their book, and people like that. But they would have to have a version of it that would show color, right? So they were excited about the fact that now, even though it's sort of like a higher end version, I'm sure as time goes on, the price will come down and more people will get the color version. But it's like the ability for self-published authors to compete with those traditional published authors, it is getting, you know, the ability to be able to do all those same things is getting, you know, closer and closer now. So there's very little that you're going to get from traditional that you can't get now from self-publishing. I love that. I think that's amazing.
It is. You know, every so often I call up my dad who lives in France, and he's 86 now, and he's like, oh, this wonderful author today. You should really check her out. You could probably get a lot of advice from her. And I'm like, Dad, I just looked up her books. I've sold 10 times more than she has. And she's a traditionally published author and I'm not. And it's kind of, you do realize the opportunity is out there if you can seize it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Well, we are coming up to the top of the hour, so I guess we will cut this short. But I've really enjoyed the opportunity just to like shoot the breeze with you about this, and you know, any opportunity to talk about Taylor Swift is a great one, isn't it? What is your favorite Taylor Swift song?
I couldn't.
And why is it Blank Space?
I'm sure I could sing along to some of them, much to my daughter's chagrin, but I couldn't tell you the names of any of them. But yeah, it has been fun, and I love what's going on in the industry. And I think that this was one of those things where, you know, we saw this article drop, and we're like, you know what, we need to talk about how. And it's not like we never talk about this, but like this, we wanted to dedicate this to the idea of the how self-publishing is now going mainstream, and even big names are getting on board, whereas in the past they would be like, they jump onto the traditional publishing because they'd give them some massive advance, right? But the advance that they would have given Taylor Swift, it will pale in comparison to what her day one sales will be, I'm sure, after she gets the majority of the royalties. So, you know, I think that this is such a big paradigm shift now with all these people doing this, these big names, and you know, that's why we wanted to come on and just chat about this.
I love it. I'm really happy we had this chat. Well, normally this is the point where we ask our guests to like say, where can you find out more about you and stuff like that. But if you want to find out more about us, I guess you could just go to hiddengemsbooks.com and find out all of the author services that we offer. We help write blurbs, we help design covers, we have marketing consult calls, all sorts of different things that we can do to help self-published authors become more successful. So if you are a self-published author and you want to become more successful, come and check out what we can do, because maybe we could really help you out.
Yep.
Right. So with that, well, I guess we'll wrap it up. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us and listening to this. Scroll down, and where that comment section is, comment what your favorite Taylor Swift song is. And once again, why it's Blank Space. While you're there, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. There's a bell icon which you can click on, and you'll get notified every time there is a new episode of Fully Booked. Next week, we'll be back with a brand new episode with a brand new guest. Probably not as much Taylor Swift content as we've got in this one, but we'll be very excited to see you. So until then, cheerio.